Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah.
And today we will be discussing Perilous Times by Thomas D. Lee. But first, what's something great that happened recently?
My something great is, well, it's twofold. One, your parents came over for dinner, which was lovely. It was really nice to see them. I haven't seen them in ages. And two, your mother brought a lot of plants. So I made out like a plant bandit.
She does do that, doesn't she?
Yes. I got so many plants. It was delightful.
Any favorites?
Well, I got a lot of echinacea. I really like echinacea, so I was pleased with that. She brought 2 roses. Well, she brought more roses, but 2 different kinds of roses. She had 40 bare root roses of this one rose. And got some lavender, some petunias, just a whole bunch of different plants.
Well, awesome.
Yeah. What's your good thing?
I went to the vagina doctor last week.
That's a good thing to do.
It is. It was not like, fun or enjoyable, but it was important. I had to do it. I did it. It's done now. Look, good things are not always fun things, right?
And sometimes the good thing is when the thing is over.
Yeah, it's also true. I will have to go back, though. You're never really done with the vagina doctor.
I mean, you're never really done with any doctor.
Oh, I am. It's very easy to just not go.
Okay, but just because it's easy doesn't mean that's the recommended method.
Oh, sure. There's lots of things I don't do with the recommended method.
Well, I'm glad that you're going to the vagina doctor on a regular basis.
It's the only high maintenance part, really. So, anyway, have either of us read any books other than this fat book we finally finished?
I have.
Really? Is that why you were reading until today?
The reason that I am late finishing Perilous Times is because I decided that I was going to spend my Saturday evening finishing Eyes of the Void by Adrian Tchaikovsky instead of starting Perilous Times. Well, that's not quite true. I got about 50 pages into Perilous Times on Saturday. But the sensible thing would have been to start Perilous Times earlier in the evening instead of waiting until I finished Eyes of the Void. And I just wanted to be done with that stupid book. It's a good book. Eyes of the Void is a good book. I just spent way too long reading it, and I was over it. I was like, I'm going to finish it, even if it makes me late reading Perilous Times. Sorry.
And we're not that late anyway. Yeah, how dare you push back recording? I would never.
Technically, we probably could have started recording at our normal time if we hadn't already made plans to start late.
It worked out.
It did work out.
Oh, well, I skipped what are we drinking tonight? I think because we've been talking about it all day.
You can ask that now.
What are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking scotch because Lancelot drinks a lot of bad scotch and I felt sorry for him. So I'm drinking nice scotch for this episode.
Well, he also drinks some Madeira.
But good Madeira.
Yes, old Madeira. The thing about the scotch is not that he was drinking bad scotch, it's that he is in a time where there is no good scotch. I feel like there's a difference between, like, I have this whole stack of bottles and I'm drinking bottom shelf scotch. It's just that's what was there.
I mean, it's true. He was not drinking bad scotch by choice.
Or even by option. It wasn't like there was a good scotch in existence.
It's true, but I still felt sorry for him.
I just feel like saying he was drinking bad scotch implies that there was good scotch. He was drinking modern scotch.
He was drinking the only scotch available to him. I think if he had been drinking bad scotch and good scotch had been available, I wouldn't have felt sorry for him. So I wouldn't have included that bit of my reasoning as to why I chose this drink.
I guess.
I would still be drinking scotch, but it wouldn't be because I felt sorry for him.
All right, this book was about King Arthur, but not really. And also the world is ending, which we already know.
Yeah, so this book is the perils of climate change, but in a Arthurian story, or in a story with Arthurian characters, because it's not actually set in Arthurian legend. It is a near future with basically some of the Knights of the Round Table coming back.
Yep.
I Really enjoyed it. I like Arthurian legend, so I was predisposed to like it anyway. I really enjoyed it, except, and this is probably a personal problem, but it used a lot of sentence fragments or like dangling sentences where they don't have any subject. And that is a pet peeve of mine. It took me out of the prose every single time it happened. And I found that very difficult. But also, to be fair, we are reading arcs. I don't know how much of that is going to be cleaned up in editing or if it was a stylistic choice that Lee made.
I didn't even notice, but I love that kind of grammar shenanigan. The weird quotation marks like in the middle of words was much more distracting for me, but I'm sure that's an arc thing.
Yeah, I'm sure that's an arc thing. So I like this kind of playing with language when it is occasional, or specifically this form of playing with language when it's occasional and like you can use it to impact. But when it happens like every other page and multiple times in a sentence, I just don't enjoy that.
Well, it can't happen multiple times in a sentence.
Okay.
Each one is one sentence.
Multiple times in a paragraph. If it was multiple times in a sentence, I'd probably have less issue because presumably there would be a subject in that sentence.
I think it's something that it mimics speech patterns, so it doesn't bother me at all. And I bet someone listening to this as an audiobook, or if you were disposed to audiobooks, you probably wouldn't notice it there either. Or as much.
It's possible that I wouldn't notice it as much in a spoken format.
It just feels very natural to me. I don't know.
I marked down a couple of...
Doesn't bother me.
I know, I use that argument all the time.
Oh, that was a sentence without a subject. That's what I was doing as the joke. Also, you use that argument, but that wasn't.
Yeah. Okay, so like, he opts for the latter, kneeling before the sofa and putting the cup's edge to her lips, period. Slowly emptying the contents, period. Like that sort of thing, just, it sounds off to me.
My suspicion is that it's a pacing thing. Short sentences end up getting read quicker.
Maybe. It's something that I see a lot in bad fan fiction, which possibly has something to do with my distaste for it.
I agree it can be done poorly. Yep. I don't think it was here.
Yeah, it was something that bothered me, but your mileage may vary. Clearly our mileage does vary.
The Arthurian legend thing also is going to vary greatly depending on how much of a shit you give.
It's true. If you don't care about Arthurian legend, I think you would still enjoy this book because there's a lot to it that is kind of like goes beyond just the mythology, but it is heavily mythology based.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the Arthurian mythology felt like a roadblock at all. Everything was contextualized perfectly well, and I do know like the basic building blocks, but I don't think I even would have needed to. It's not my thing. So a lot of the like, I don't know, really epic moments, I was like, so?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the epic moments stand on their own rather than relying on a knowledge of Arthurian legend or caring for Arthurian legend.
Well, there are epic moments for, God, we've now used that phrase. I regret bringing that phrase into this. It has immediately devolved. There are standout moments in this novel that are excellent for what they mean for the story. And then there are moments that feel like it should be like slow-mo with some music playing in the background. And it's like, it's this person. There were two kinds of moments. We'll get into that later.
Yeah. Okay.
Not being particularly into Arthurian legend actually worked out in my favor a little bit. Or at least this book acknowledged me. I felt seen. Because every time King Arthur comes up, I'm kind of like, so what? But the Knights of the Round Table in this book had the same opinion of King Arthur. I felt very vindicated. Like, yeah, that guy is lame. Why should I give a shit?
A character at one point describes Arthur as just some bloke, which I really liked. They were talking in the context of like, he's not worth it. He's just some bloke. And I really liked that description of him as someone who is the kind of everyman character, like not worth it, nothing special, nothing to throw yourself at.
I think it's very interesting seeing the everyman ascending to heroism from this sort of retrospective angle, right? Because that's a plot line that I think a lot of people are still very into as an origin story. Watching that happen, like, yeah, anyone can be special. But the version of it we're seeing in this book is he has forgotten that he was just anyone.
Yeah.
And now thinks he is special. And so I just thought that was a very, like, you live long enough to become the villain type of thing, right? Although I guess technically he didn't live long enough.
And he's also not really the villain. Is that a spoiler?
That's just a phrase.
But yes.
That's a phrase people know, right? Like,
it is a phrase.
I wasn't using it literally. He's a douche.
he is a douche. But you're right, I think, about a lot of storylines in fantasy being about the
underdog.
Yeah, the underdog or the normal person kind of ascending to power. And you don't often see the aftermath of that, because like that journey to power is the story. And so it was fascinating to see that play out here with this mythological character.
Also, this sort of man out of time angle, right? He was a heroic king in his own time, but this is the 21st century, baby. Or whatever time this book takes place. I didn't get the sense that it was supposed to be that far in the future, kind of poignantly so.
Yeah, I definitely thought it was very pointedly near future. But Kay, who is our main point of view character.
I would say he's the main character, yeah.
Yeah, we got a lot from Miriam too, but...
We do, but you could argue that they are both main characters, but I think Kay does outweigh her from the just book contents.
I think it's interesting because I don't get the sense that Miriam necessarily is the point of view character for the reader. I think we get a lot more of that from Kay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but Miriam is much more integral to the plot.
Yes.
Kay is almost just an observer at times.
Yeah, like Miriam is the character who drives the plot and is, I would argue, the hero of the story, even though there's lots of discussion about heroism and whether heroes are necessary or should be a thing. But yeah, I think Kay is how the reader learns about the world.
Yeah, we get a lot more of his internal life, I think. We get some of Miriam too, but not as much.
Well, and I guess it also makes sense because Kay, so the way that Kay is continuously brought back into the world, like he dies and then he comes back up in times of peril to go save Britain. That means that he is learning about this world like with the reader. And when the world is not it's, as we've said, it's like a near future, so it's not exactly like our world. It feels like we're being introduced to all of the concepts and things that are happening through him.
I would say it's apocalyptic. It's not post-apocalyptic. It's
pre-apocalyptic.
Yeah, I would say that. I was going to say cusp, the cusp of apocalypse. Just from a sense of the planet falling to pieces. Not like a big supervillain saying, I'm going to take over the world.
Yeah, I mean, Lee goes very hard on the message of climate change. Climate change being a thing. And if we don't do anything, we're going to run this world into the ground.
I mean, the country's on the world, so that's going to go too.
Yes.
And it was very much from the viewpoint of Great Britain, but I think that's a situation that a lot of countries are in. So it didn't feel too navel-gazy in that respect.
Yeah, he does, even though all of the action takes place in the UK or whatever, he does comment that Amsterdam is underwater and India has no water. And clearly the climate change that's not just a Britain problem.
Right, but also the needing to do something about it.
Yes, that is not just a Britain problem either.
But I think that it does focus much more on British government and British responsibility, but I felt more like that's because that's where Miriam lived. And so that's where she was trying to make a change, not because Great Britain is responsible for the planet and needs to babysit everyone else.
Yes.
There was an excellent line near the beginning of the book. Our main character, Kay, has a vision of a nature god. Herna?
Hern. Well, I've always said Hern. I don't know if that's actually how it's pronounced.
That guy. And that guy is saying that he doesn't care who's on the throne, but now the trees are dying, which is why he's beginning to meddle. And it's like, gee, you think caring who was on the throne might have prevented that a little bit? Maybe you should have cared.
I mean, it's true that who is on the throne can have a great impact on that, but other characters in the book say that they've meddled in that way and it hasn't done much good or not done any lasting good.
But also the whole fucking point of the book is that you have to try to do something.
Yes.
You can't just say, well, my part is too small, so there's no point in trying. Like, the whole point is that, yeah, you should try anyway. Even if you're Hern.
that is the theme of the book, is just, do whatever you can.
I do quibble with that a little bit, just from like a philosophical standpoint. I think a lot of the rhetoric around environmentalism ends up being very like personal responsibility. You're a bad person for taking a shower that's too long. When you actually look at like the percentages of impact on the environment, and it's much more like in the industrial sector, and like every single human being could immediately stop taking showers and it still wouldn't help.
Yes.
So like, I didn't hate the message, but it did feel a little bit like misplaced finger wagging.
I mean, but I think that the book does a good job at pointing out that actually it's like this group of old guys who are stand-ins for industry who are causing all of these problems, and that it's not so much that you should take a stand to reduce your shower water usage individually, more take a stand against the people who are actually at the heart of the problem.
Right. I agree. And that's why it didn't like make me mad. It was just something I noticed a couple of times. Because there's a lot of talk about individual efforts and you can't wait for someone else to fix it, which is great. I love that message. Yes, everyone should do everything they can. But also, not everyone can go start blowing up oil tankers. It felt like a very easy thing to say in a novel with a very clear-cut situation where there is the big red button to press to stop everything. Like, yeah, if there was a button, I wouldn't wait for someone else to press it. Unfortunately, there is not.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And I agree with you that outside of the world of fiction, the messaging often places a disproportional amount of blame on individual consumers when it should be pointing fingers at, industrial complexes and capitalism and all of that.
Now, this book also does talk about how people need to throw away their petty differences long enough to work together to make a difference. And I do believe that collective action and everyone standing behind a movement could definitely make a difference, is maybe the only thing that can. So I think that this is the fantasy novel. And it's making a point, but I can't listen to it word for word. And that's okay.
It's making a point that is very relevant to the fantasy world in which it lives.
And I think because it is so obviously a reflection of our current situation, it's hard not to compare it one-to-one, but that does it an injustice, right? Like, this book is still telling a story. It's a story with a point, but you have to give it that space to make its point poetically.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I really enjoyed about this book is how diversely made the past, because Arthurian legend tends to be very whitewashed just by like its nature as the origin story for Britain, even though that's not actually what Arthurian legend was originally at all.
It's also just something that happens because we're looking at the past through the lens of the more recent past, right? The best example is archaeologists realizing that half of the Viking graves were women, and that archaeologists who discovered them didn't even bother to check because they were like, oh, buried with a weapon? That's a dude.
Yeah, we bring our modern biases to bear on history.
Mm-hmm. But not always accurate. Often inaccurate, in fact.
Yes, often very inaccurate. So I appreciate that this book kind of pokes fun at that.
Oh, extensively. Kay, our main character, is a black man from ancient Britain.
Yeah.
Which was excellent. Ancient, right? Yeah, because Rome was around. I can say ancient, yeah.
You can say ancient.
Okay.
And like he gets in fights with Nazis or neo-Nazis who, make the argument that you should go back to where you're from. And he's like, dude, I'm from here. I've been here for longer than you have.
Yep. Oh, telling the punk that his name sounded French and maybe he should go home.
That was great.
It was such a simple way of pointing out you don't care about immigrants, you just care about black people or people of color.
Mm-hmm.
There's also some very excellent moments because Kay does confront modern things that he is flabbergasted by. For example, when he discovers that Miriam and her friends are all vegetarian. After he just did a lot of work to hunt dinner for them. But then he's, a reasonable person and is able to reframe it so that it makes sense to him. And he's like, oh, it's like a holy vow. Sure, I would never ask you to break that. And you could tell the characters were gearing up for a fight.
I think, like I said, because we are often looking at history with our own modern perception, when it doesn't react the way that we think it will, it's a surprise.
It being history.
It being history, yes. when people from history or legend come to life and they don't react the way we think they will based on our wrong perception of what their life was like.
We have a little bit more conversation to get to, but first, Sarah, who should read this book?
You should read this book if you enjoy Arthurian mythology, if you want a book that's a story about climate change and how you can fight it if you have, I was going to say
a magic sword.
if you have a magic sword, but really the whole point of it is that you don't need the magic sword, but the magic sword will help.
Yeah, it is very satisfying. I know I just complained extensively about how, one person can't fix everything, but it is really nice to read a story where they can.
Although I think the point is that she's not fixing things by herself, even though she's the catalyst and the main driver. She does rely on her friends.
Of course. I guess I'm more coming from a perspective of
there's one thing that you can do that will magically solve everything.
There's a concrete answer.
Yes.
In this book of how to fix it. And things aren't, I guess, not fix it, but improve things. Mm-hmm. There's a straight way forward. And sometimes it's just nice to save the world. And not everything has to be, the trolley problem.
Yes.
You want to kill 5 people or do you want to kill 20 people? No, let's just pick up the train. It's fine.
Which is kind of Miriam's whole thesis statement in this book.
And yeah, so you can't bring all of the conversations in this book directly to apply to the real world, but it is very satisfying to have an action adventure versus climate change. And if you like the idea or just the concept of the past and the present clashing, I think also is explored very nicely. We see Kay, our main character, but also a few other characters who are sort of displaced in time, and comparing how they react to that is all very well done. I'm saying you don't have to like Arthurian legend to enjoy this book. It probably helps, but
I think it helps. And you probably shouldn't hate Arthurian legend, but
if you hate King Arthur, it might be all right.
Okay, you can hate King Arthur, but you probably shouldn't hate Arthurian mythology as a whole.
Yeah, probably.
But you can be neutral on Arthurian mythology and hate King Arthur and still enjoy this book.
Absolutely. But I bet if you do like it, you'll get something else out of it, and we can talk about that now.
This episode of Fiction Fans is brought to you by Killing Nazis.
It's good. 2 thumbs up.
To avoid spoilers, skip to 4302.
Yeah, so I will say that, and I don't know, like I'm no Arthurian, researcher. I don't know everything. I don't even know a lot of stuff, but I did read a lot of Arthurian retellings in my formative years, and some of that has stayed with me. So I did call Regan and Ambrose as Morgan, Morgana, and Merlin, like very early on.
Did you remember that Merlin's first name is Ambrosius?
Yes.
Oh, well, then that'll do it.
Yes.
I got to that part, that reveal in the book, and I was like, damn, I'm glad he explained that to me in very clear language. And I bet there's a lot of readers who think it's dumb that he's explaining it in very clear language. That's something you either know it or you don't.
Yeah. It's like I've read stories where I'm going to have to look up how this is spelled because I don't actually know how it's pronounced. Where there's a character whose name is Myrdddin, and it's supposed to be a big reveal that that's Merlin. And I'm like, that's just his Welsh name. like it's obvious to anyone that that's going to be Merlin. But yeah, thank you, Mary Stewart, The Crystal Cave, which is all about that series of books, Quartet, I think, is all about Roman Arthurian legend. Like it talks about Uther and Vortigern and the dragons and all of that. Yeah. So that's where I got Ambrosius.
See, I did read a couple of retellings when I was like 14 or whatever, mostly about Morgana. I had a friend who was obsessed with Morgana, and so she would always recommend those books. I read more than one, and nothing. There was nothing worth keeping out of any of it.
Well, it will be interesting. We do have another Arthurian retelling on the calendar because I'm the one in charge of the calendar, not you. And I didn't realize that you were so disinclined towards Arthurian legend. I will keep that in mind going forward.
I'm being silly. I'm like, I don't dislike it. It's just something that I've slid off of every time. Like I try occasionally and I'm just like, still not for me.
Yeah. Well, we do have one other book on the calendar, The Cleaving by Juliet McKenna, which focuses specifically on the 4 main women in Arthurian mythology. And I think it actually is more of a historical novel than, obviously this is not a historical novel in the least. So it'll be interesting to see what you think of that story and how your views on Arthurian legend in that compare to your views on Arthurian legend in this.
Yeah, I think to me it's not a bonus. It gives no bonus points. I think true neutral is the right way. I think you described it that way earlier. Like having Arthurian legend is not going to make up for any other deficiencies in a book. Like it's not going to ruin it for me, but it just brings nothing to the table. I don't know. It just doesn't speak to me.
Well, I would say that for me, having Arthurian legend in a book is not going to make up for major deficiencies in a book.
I didn't say major. I said any. Because I do, at least for Greek mythology, the warmth and familiarity of Greek mythology is a benefit on its own, regardless of the quality of the story. Just because it's nice to read something you know a little bit. There's just the nostalgia maybe.
Yeah, I mean it definitely is nice to have some familiarity with the characters and their backstories, even if it's being told in a completely new way. I think it's kind of the same appeal as fan fiction, to be honest.
Absolutely. Hell yeah. Same thing, 100%.
Yes. Yes. So you have a little less work to become invested in the characters because you have this knowledge of them from, whatever other reading you may have done, whether it's fan fiction or whether it's mythology. And that is for sure a bonus.
And to me, despite having some rudimentary knowledge of Arthurian legends, I knew the Guinevere thing. I knew who Lancelot was. I knew that he was supposed to come back to save the world. I knew that was a thing.
Lee does kind of subvert the Lancelot Guinevere plot line in this.
Right. I like all of this conversation almost has nothing to do with this book because Lee explains everything. You don't need background knowledge to understand what's happening. I think what I was trying to get at is that even though I recognize those things, it did not bring any of the warm, fuzzy fan fiction feelings. It was almost academic in the, oh yes, that is a name I recognize, and I could rattle off 2 facts about them. And so again, that was not a problem I had with this book, but it was definitely something that I noticed while reading it. Like, oh, someone else, a different reader would probably be very happy right now.
Or at least a different reader would be getting more out of it right now, out of this scene.
Well, yeah, but like there are very specific moments, like the Morgan and Merlin reveal. Those are the best examples. But I'm saying like very small moments, like a half of a paragraph, where I'm like, oh, that's fan service for someone else. Basically, I noticed those moments in this book that I was like, this is going to make someone very happy. As the book as a whole, fantastic. Like, you didn't need any of that. Despite all of my like weird back and forth right now, I enjoyed this book very much. I read it in like a day, and it's 2,000 pages long.
Yeah, I was actually, when you told me on Monday you had finished, I was like, wow, that is a lot sooner than you normally finish our podcast books.
Yeah, I did get sunburnt for my efforts, but
On the whole, worth it?
Yeah. Oh, it was kind of funny reading a book about global warming and climate change while purposefully baking myself in the sun.
There's a little bit of irony there, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a 70-degree spring day. That's not an unreasonable number. It's not like the 118-degree day we had last summer, 2 summers ago. That is climate change.
Yes, 118 degrees, no.
Where was I, you ask? Camping. Because what else should you do during a historic heat dome other than go for a hike in a rainforest? Ladies and gentlemen, that was a terrible idea.
But maybe it prepared you to empathize with some of the scenes where Miriam and her band and the FIDA group are hiking through the wilderness in the heat.
The heat and the humidity. Because, yeah, they were also going through bogs and stuff. So It must have been just swampy and miserable.
Yeah, it did not sound like fun hiking.
Yeah, I felt kind of bad because I was like, I'm enjoying this gorgeous day.
And meanwhile, the characters are suffering.
And every time the pros brought up how miserably hot it was, I was like, no, sounds terrible. There was a lot of this book that was extremely relatable. And relatable almost feels like too trite of a word.
Relatable, relevant, I mean...
Yeah, I mean, it's a technically correct word. But when I say it out loud, it feels like I'm saying, #relatable. That's not what I mean. Anyway, so you mentioned Merlin earlier, and I did actually have a major problem with some of his actions. Not from a he's being rude perspective. He can be a rude, weird wizard. That's fine.
He wasn't just rude, though. He was mean.
Very mean. Cutthroat mean. And it was interesting the way Kay describes how Merlin just didn't get that someone could even be upset by what he does. Like, I felt like Kay's description of him was extremely sympathetic, more so than Merlin deserved, maybe.
Yes. I agree. It felt like Kay had a lot of residual fondness for Merlin, and Merlin did not deserve any of that in the least.
I have a lot of mixed feelings. He was such a fun, nutty professor. He's going to use mushrooms to save the world. I love it. I love everything about that. He tricked all these poor guys into coming back to life over and over again. Shitty thing to do, but it fits with the vicious, nutty professor vibe. So, like, I wouldn't want to be his friend, but I still really like him as a character for that. What bothered me is that we spend, like, several chapters establishing how little Merlin cares about the people around him. He's like, I'm trying to save the world. That's literally all I care about. And they try to do this last stand It doesn't go well.
Does not go well.
And so Merlin whisks everyone out of the grasp of the corporate baddies back to his cave to say, oh yeah, this timeline's fucked. I'm going to a different one. Sucks to suck. See you in hell, basically.
Okay, so I have a slightly different interpretation, not of his actions.
Okay.
Like I'm not disagreeing with you about what he does.
I mean, he didn't actually say any of the words I just said. I do know that.
No, but I would have believed it because I loved that this book just used modern vernacular, you know. Like he could have said that and it would have probably been fine in the text. But I didn't see it as a discrepancy in what he was doing, because I do think that I don't want to say cares about Kay or the people around him in a personal sense. Like, he's not necessarily invested in keeping them alive, but I think that if it's easy for him to do so, he would take the view that there's no harm in it. Like, if they're within his vicinity and he's leaving this bad situation and like they can be encompassed by his spell, he will do that, but he's not going to go out of his way to save people.
Yeah, I guess. I think I would have been okay with that if he then didn't have a whole conversation with Kay about, you know, are you sure that there's nothing we can do to save this planet? And Merlin effectively says, no, you might as well just lay down and die.
But he wanted to go back to his cave anyway to get his stuff.
Right. So Merlin wanted to get his things to go to a different world. Like, he was basically had his bug out bag and it was like piecing out to a different timeline.
Right. But if he's leaving the corporate baddies, might as well take his quote unquote friends along if he's leaving anyway. And then they can, you know,
die slowly.
Die in the cave. Yeah.
I don't know.
Because I do get the impression that he would just leave them to die. I mean, he did just leave them to die in the cave.
Yeah, he leaves them to die. I don't know. It feels like the book is trying to set him up as this, like, sort of head in the clouds analytical, which sounds like a contradiction, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
And so that just felt, I don't know. When I read it, I was like, oh, we're going to find out that Merlin saw that the only way for them to win is if he stops meddling. So he has to remove himself from the situation, and that their last chance was actually like these different circumstances or something. Because there's no way he would actually bother to do all of this if he was truly as hopeless as he's saying he is. No, he was.
I mean, I do kind of agree that it would have felt fulfilling to see a little more from that, but I wasn't bothered by his actions as being contradictory in the way that you were.
A lot of the ending of this book felt like a series of Deus Ex Machinas, and this is an example of that. It's a character acting against how he has been characterized, purely so that the plot of the book can continue. And yeah, you can make an argument that, sure, it's not ridiculous that he would do these things, but it does feel counter to how he's been set up. And I needed a better reason for him to do that than just because that just makes it feel more like a Deus Ex Machina.
That's fair.
I think that's my complaint, is that if he had had a better reason, it wouldn't have felt like so much like a Deus Ex Machina.
That's fair. I mean, I didn't feel that it was counter to what we had been shown, but I can certainly see your argument there.
If it hadn't been such a pivotal moment of the plot, then him doing it on a whim for absolutely no reason would have felt okay.
See, Merlin didn't bother me, but the point or the scene where Nimue gives Caliburn to Miriam did, for basically the same reason, because, you know, 40 pages earlier, we see her talking to Kay about how she's not going to give the sword to anyone. And then here she's giving the sword to Miriam. And I was like, surely she's going to talk, at least have one line about why she changed her mind. And we don't get that at all.
See, I feel like her conversation with Kay was much more like, I'm not going to give this to you. I don't trust you. And if you want me to give it to someone, then I don't trust them. But then when she when Nimue is the one who meets Miriam, she's like, oh yeah, this kid's all right.
But Nimue doesn't meet Miriam. They exchange no conversation.
That she's a god. I believe that gods can just like sense personalities. That is within the realm of this world. Like, that
okay,
feel weird.
But see, for me, for me, that was not something that was established about her character. That was counter to everything that we had seen, and I needed at least something explaining that.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
I did really like the zombie mushroom cordyceps nonsense that Merlin was pulling.
It felt, I think in his acknowledgments, Lee says that he started writing this book in 2016. So it was being written long before like the current mushroom zombie fad.
This is not a criticism of him. It does not feel derivative. The Last of Us came out before that.
I was going to say, I don't actually know when The Last of Us games came out. I would certainly believe that it was before he started writing this book. But I would also say that concept is enjoying a surge in popularity right at this minute.
2013. Yes, I agree. I also love every second of it.
I'm not saying it was a bad thing.
No, I know you're not. It is absolutely having this like
cultural zeitgeist
moment. Yeah. Jinx, you owe me a Madeira. The Last of Us, the game came out in 2013. It was a very big game, but still definitely like in the gamer sphere. Not like Skyrim. Everybody knows Skyrim, Minecraft, or whatever. Like, The Last of Us was still definitely a nerd thing.
I think The Last of Us was at least large enough that someone like me on the very, very, very peripheral fringes of gaming heard about it.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe Lee is a gamer. I don't know.
Yeah, I actually have no idea.
It's not as big. It was not as big as it, like, now it is practically a household name, right?
Yes. Yes.
We're not talking about The Last of Us right now. We're talking about mushrooms saving the world, like that amazing documentary we watched.
We did watch a pretty great documentary about mushrooms when we were at Gallifrey 1. It's true.
But that doesn't have anything to do with King Arthur.
No, and the mushrooms don't actually save the world in this book.
We don't know that.
I think it's pretty heavily implied that they don't.
Well, they don't save this world.
Yes, okay. They don't save the world that we are reading about. But it's true, Merlin could put his plan into effect in another timeline and another world and save the world that way.
I assume he does, just because I love the idea of everyone being mushroom zombies, but like in a healthy way.
They get to wake up from it normal later.
Yeah. On page 385 of Perilous Times by Thomas D. Lee, the author uses the phrase pervious. This is a very silly word, and I laughed a lot. That's the end. That's the words are weird.
It is a very silly word. It does look naked without the M in front of it.
It's arresting. Like, looking at pervious, I can understand the meaning of it perfectly fine, but it's still just like, what are you doing there? Who let you in?
Well, it's not a word that we see very often these days, even though it's still a valid word.
Sure. I think it's funny that you say these days, because pervious is the newer version, right? I think we discovered.
Yeah, so pervious is the newer version by 15 years. Impervious was the first recorded date, according to Merriam-Webster. Impervious was first used in like 1615, and pervious was used in 1631, the first recorded usage. So like, yes, it is the newer version, but not by much.
So really, pervious was the young upstart who thought it was all that, but wasn't able to stick around. Was not as impervious as impervious, you might say.
Well, 400 years old, though.
Yeah, but we don't use it.
No, we don't.
So, does it count?
It didn't have staying power.
No. It did lead us to look up the concept of unpaired words, though, which is very fascinating, super fun. I think gruntled out of disgruntled is the most common one, because gruntled just sounds like such a silly word.
Although technically pervious and impervious are not unpaired words, because an unpaired word is when a word doesn't have like a related word, right?
Well, impervious did not until they invented pervious 15 years later, just because we have since decided pervious is a real word.
Yes, okay.
It had the same origin situation. How's that?
That's true. Okay.
But yeah, there's this whole thing of words that linguistically look like they have a prefix, but the prefixed version is actually the original word. I've never heard someone use gruntled sincerely. It's always a joke because it's such a silly thing.
That is the 1920s origin story, or 1913 or whatever it was.
I also really liked bunk out of debunk. I'm going to bunk that fact.
That I don't hear. I feel like I hear gruntled more often than I hear bunked. Not sincerely, but I still hear it more often.
Oh, I definitely hear gruntled, but always as a joke. It's always, this is a stupid word. Wouldn't it be ridiculous if it was real? Shoveled. We had some back and forth on whether shoveled from disheveled was a real word. I think shoveled is as much of a real word as pervious is.
I think that there are more known usages of pervious than shoveled. If you can prove it has been used or is in use, I will accept your argument.
I would argue that neither of them are particularly in use right now.
No, but pervious clearly has been used.
I bet someone has used shoveled at some point.
Have enough people use shoveled that it has a Merriam-Webster.
You can't just
I know that language is not descriptive, but
more specifically, I was going to say Merriam-Webster ain't the only dictionary.
Okay, Merriam-Webster is not the only dictionary. If you can find me a valid dictionary definition of shoveled in any other dictionary that's not Wikipedia,
I'm not going to look for it. It's just a funny non-word. I also really love combobulated. When would you ever say, like, that really combobulates me? For, like, I don't know, a description of something that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I feel like now the challenge is that we have to use it in our episode description.
I could see using gruntled. Yeah, I think gruntled has more use cases. So even though everyone's kind of like winking when they use it, I get why it comes up more.
Yeah, like, well, I also think that just gruntled is used more. This is a very circular argument. Gruntled is used more because it's used more.
It also sounds silly.
Yes.
Like, just the sound of the word is funny. Much more so than couth.
Mm-hmm.
Not uncouth and couth. So, anyway, I thought that was fun. Words are weird.
Words are weird.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
We also have a Patreon where you can support us and find our show notes and some other nonsense.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.